Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Cup of Joy. I'm your host, Ariana Joy Christie, and I am so glad that you are here. This is a space to inspire, to learn, to grow, and to challenge. Get ready to fill your cup and spread a little joy along the way. Sarah Taylor, wellness, faith, and self-love advocate, creator, and mom. Welcome to Your Cup of Joy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited that you're joining me. We have had the privilege of kind of getting to know each other briefly at little events and such, but I'm so excited to have been able to. I had dinner with you a couple weeks ago, and it was just so special to connect and to realize that we have so many things in common.
Yeah, we really do.
It's wild to me that you can live life, go through life saying hey to someone and not really know anything about them. And then when you dive deep, I think that those relationships are so meaningful because obviously we were meant to meet.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's cool how you can have those authentic, genuine connections and just kind of see how they're fostered in different seasons. You have different people come into your life. And I just think it's cool to be able to connect for fun, but also on a deeper level. I'm not one for surface talk. So when you can meet people who are like, oh, let's talk about the hard stuff and actually welcome those conversations, it's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And we live in this world of not really being vulnerable and just pushing things away. And I think that can just be something that's lightly said, but I think that there's actually detrimental effects to that long term when you're continuously trying to just be like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, everything's great.
Meanwhile, you're crumbling behind the scenes and trying to keep it together.
Yes. And unfortunately, that's the reality for so many people. So I'm so grateful for you for being open and honest, for showing up online in that capacity too. And just for casual conversations, showing people that it's okay to be vulnerable and to talk about what is really going on.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I want to start a little bit by talking about a post that I saw you post just yesterday, and it really resonated with me and just hit me hard, I think. The message that you shared, it was a carousel, but one of the quotes was, "May the tears you cried in 2024 water the seeds you're planting in 2025."
I might actually cry hearing it again.
Literally, let that sink in. If you're listening, I'm going to say it one more time. May the tears you cried in 2024 water the seeds you're planting in 2025.
Yeah.
And it is so impactful, Sarah. The fact that it's giving you that emotional response, I think even proves how impactful that is. I think it's easy to say oh yeah, you got to go through hard times to get to the good parts. It's so easy to just say that.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard grow through what you go through. That's something that's always stuck with me. And it's just so impactful because sometimes when we're going through hard times, we think it will never get better.
Yeah.
Or how am I ever going to recover from this? How will things ever move forward? And I think it's much easier to just say, no, I'm just going to be sad.
Yeah.
Or,
and I
I'll
think
just hold on to this.
Yeah, and I think also when people do finally share what's going on, they get those sentiments like you just shared, right? And then people feel really dismissed for what's actually going on in their life. And that's something you and I talked about at that dinner recently with Cheekbone. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned in this last year, because I've had a very hard year and still had to show up for my daughter and a social community and my clients. And I think that empathy is something that a lot of us miss in our fast-paced social media world. And it is those quotes that you hear thrown at you like, you're strong, it'll be okay, it'll work out, it always works out. Okay, I understand that, but can we just acknowledge that this is really hard and I'm really struggling and I just need to be seen and heard? Yeah. And I hope that I think both of us try and create and foster those types of connections with people so people feel heard and that they don't feel alone. Because I think we're hearing more and more as women open up that we're not alone in the hard seasons that we're in. And we just want to feel like we belong, that it will be okay, and that someone hears and sees us.
Totally. Sometimes just knowing that somebody is with you or somebody has felt the feelings that you've felt before. I think especially in parenthood, any negative emotion or feeling that happens, I feel bad for. As if I already didn't feel bad about what's actually happening, then I feel guilty that I feel bad on top of that. How wild that's the way that our brains work. But then when somebody just says oh, I remember that time and it was really hard.
Yeah.
Immediately, I'm like, "Thank you." Like, I'm not
Yeah.
crazy. I'm not alone in this, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the power of community is so impactful.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I'm so happy that we're talking about, like, nobody wants to talk about bad things or, like, things
No.
that they've gone through or feeling sad. Like, you know, I have a friend who, when I was in the NICU with the twins, I she said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm okay." And she's like, "I know you're not." And I was like, "Thank you." Like, it's like we feel that
Yeah.
we need to have this response to not make people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and have hard conversations, and that nobody really wants to know what's actually going on, and then we feel like we can't talk about it, and then we are like, "But how do I move forward if I can't even speak about it? And if
Totally.
nobody's gonna listen?" Right?
Yes.
That just keeps you in this perpetuated state of stuck, and how are we gonna grow when we're stuck, right?
For sure. Yeah, like, how do I get out of this? And I think it is very difficult because in a world of, like, instant gratification, wanting things all at once, it's so difficult to be okay with the place that we're in.
Yeah.
And to know that, yes, there's a plan, things will get better, things will,
Mhm.
but to just be okay with where we are now is something that nobody practices anymore. You just want more and more and more or different, and
Yeah.
it's something I struggle with. Like, why can't I just be content with how life is for me now?
Mhm.
Why do I
Yeah.
want more?
Yeah.
And what even is more, you know?
Yeah. No, it's
It's
true.
it's wild.
We're not really given like, just like parents, we're not given like a, here, this is how you parent. Here's your manual, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you be in a peaceful place in life when everything is on fire? And I
Mhm.
think as I was journaling last night before bed thinking about our conversation today, and I was like, what's something that I can bring to this conversation that I think will be really meaningful to people, given what we've already talked about, what we want to share. And I was reminded of my daughter Brooklyn was born September of 2021. And every Christmas, my girlfriends and I, it's also around my birthday. My birthday's 10 days before Christmas. But we always choose a word for the year.
Huh.
And I remember being at that dinner and I was like, my life is not peaceful. And so my word for 2022 was pursuing peace. And so I had no idea. Now looking back 2.5 years later, I'm like, that decision to pursue peace forced me to make the hard decisions to remove what was causing a lack of peace. And I have learned to have peace in the midst of the eye of the storm.
Mm.
And it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy, especially like as a mom, still having to show up and care and be nurturing and teach. And then also in the role of being a coach, and then also having a social community as well.
Mhm.
Um, but I think when we make that decision that we want to pursue peace, I don't think we realize like what it costs us. But in the end, I know it's going to be worth it so that life is led by peace and all decisions are then led by what brings me peace. And you say no to things that aren't bringing you peace. And I think that
Mhm.
that for me, remembering that, I was like, whoa, I had no idea what that one little seed was going to do the next 2.5 years.
That's amazing, and I think it just goes to show that one little step can turn into big reward
Yeah.
and big output. So, the things that you do and the actions that you take, even if they feel really small, can have massive, massive impact on your life. And I
Yeah.
think
And
that's a
I,
huge thing to note.
I totally agree. And I think we often think we have to make these big, wild swoops for change. But
Mhm.
you're right. It comes back to like, what are the small little changes that we're going to be consistent with for ourselves? And then it's also marrying it with the, how do I choose myself today?
Yes.
And especially as moms, it's really hard to like, how do I choose myself today? Does that mean like getting a bath? Does that mean like going through the drive through so that like I can have a little bit of peace and we spend a little bit more time in the car? Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? Yeah, and those little decisions add up so that you're living that life of peace that you want.
I love that, and I think it's such a good reminder for me because I'm an all or nothing
Same here.
kind of human
Most of
being.
us are.
It's awful. Like, I'm like, if I'm not gonna be able to go to the gym for an hour and a half, then I'm not working out at all. Or, like, if I'm not gonna
Yep.
eat in a certain way, then I'm not gonna do it at all. Like, if I'm not gonna be out with my friends 5 nights a week, then I'm just gonna have no friendships. It's
Yep.
so silly and very irrational, but it's the way that my brain is wired. So I love that you say these little steps can create such big impact, and I think it's
Mhm.
something that I need to really remember. Just take one step,
Yeah.
and then the rest will come, and it gets easier every time.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think, again, with that post that I shared last night, it was all around this vision that I had over 12 years ago of walking in a dark hallway, pitch black. But as I took each step, a motion sensor light came on to light that
Mm.
one step. And so it was that reminder
Oh.
of like, I'm only going to have light when I take that step. I'm not necessarily going to have the foresight for the next 15 steps, which I would really like as a type A.
Yeah.
But it's that reminder of like taking one step. And so one of my mantras the last like year has just been just take the next right step. You only have to
Hmm.
focus on the one, and the one that feels the most peaceful.
I love that, and to drive it with peace. I'm a very, like, values-based person. This whole year, that's kind of been my thing of looking at is, like, what is the value driving this decision, and if it doesn't align with my
Mm,
values, why am I doing it? And I
that's
think it's
powerful.
so
So
powerful.
powerful.
If you kind of reflect back to that, like, really
Hmm.
think about what are your core values, the things that you really make all your decisions based off of, and if you ever have any feeling of being, like, uneasy, it's probably because you're doing something that isn't aligned with your values.
I love that. I'm going to steal that.
Mhm, and peace
That's
is
so
gonna be
good.
one of yours.
Yeah, it
Like,
definitely is.
it really is when you simplify it in that sense and kind of reflect on the things you're doing, especially as, like, a people pleaser, when I say yes to all of these things, like, why am I saying yes to
Yeah,
them? Why am I doing this?
yeah,
And I think, yeah, it's a challenge for myself to get away from that kind of people pleasing mentality and really focus on my values and being firm in what they are and knowing that that's who I am.
yeah, totally. And I think the other thing too is like when you think about, I've coached a lot of women. I've been a plus size personal trainer for 7 years and hundreds of women, thousands if not. And there are so many who are used to living in chaos. So chaos
Mm,
and the feeling of chaos inside feels normal. And then when you have a sense of peace, you're like, whoa, what's that? Right? Because it's so foreign. And so a lot of us have to like push back to the what feels normal, which is chaos, and
mhm.
dive further into that sense of peace and like, oh right, when I make a decision, I shouldn't be freaking out inside, and my stomach shouldn't be all in knots and twists and like, right? Like some of that's like
Totally.
some trauma relation.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important to like identify those feelings and flowing in that.
Yeah, I love
Easier
that.
said than done.
So much easier said than done, but I think such a good way to really just reflect. Like, it takes work to do that reflection,
Hmm.
but it is so impactful. I wanna read one more quote from the post that you made because
Sure.
it's been on my mind all morning since I read it last night, and I just think it's such a good analogy. So it says, "Google Maps doesn't
Mm.
say, 'Hey, you're going the wrong way,' when you make a wrong turn. It simply adjusts your route and tells you the next turn that you should take." And just like that, maybe you're not off track in life. Perhaps your route just got redirected and it might take longer and further to get there. But guess what? You're still on track. Sometimes you arrive at your destination, other times you get to a new direction. Just keep moving. You're getting there.
Mhm.
I love that. I get goosebumps when I read it. I've probably read it like 60 times today.
That's
Just
awesome.
thinking like, wow, that's so true. Like, how often do I get distracted and I miss my turn or I take the wrong turn and I'm like, "Oh, shoot, like now I'm going to take an extra 10 minutes." But it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And normally, like something cool comes out of that
Mhm.
sometimes, something unexpected, something
That's
that we
true.
didn't plan. And
Mhm.
so I think kind of letting go of the control, which is very hard for me, is
Same.
very important, and just knowing that, like, it's gonna work out. It'll be
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah. Um, I think it's also like remembering like the series of decisions along the way,
Mm,
and how they add up, including how you're going to handle it. So
mm.
your emotions in it. So if you miss a turn, you're like, ah, and you're like frustrated, right? And that feeling like
Yeah.
comes over you. And that for me, that's like something I've tried to like work really hard on is when bad things happen, I react so hard. And it used to take me like weeks and days to like pull myself out of holes. Now it can often take like an hour or a day, depending on how big the issue is. And
Yeah.
I think that as you learn that you're going to get to where you're supposed to be anyway, and we can
Mhm.
kind of let go of that control, that's one of the ways that we can find peace, even if we're in a fire or a storm or whatever you want to refer to it as.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really hard to release that control, especially as women, especially when we have so much, and moms like having so much on our plate, we're being pulled in a thousand directions. um, it can be really hard to be in that place, but it
Mhm.
is possible.
Yeah.
It is possible. Said
Yeah.
from somebody whose life was very different a year and a half ago than it is now. I was in a relationship a year and a half ago with my daughter's father. I am now single, rebuilding my entire life. Several moves in between, moving back in with my mom before 40. Like literally my entire life was different a
Mhm.
year ago. And so I, even though it's been so hard and it's taken me on this detour I did not want or
Yeah.
expect, I've been able to find that peace, and I'm still going, and I haven't
Mhm.
given up, and I haven't just stayed in bed, and have been able to accomplish a lot even in that time. And I think it just goes to show like the power of our mindset. Faith, my faith is a really big part of my life, and that helps navigate on
Yeah.
those routes um, as well. But there's a lot that goes into it, and we're complex as women.
Very much so. And as human beings, I want to talk a little bit more about that faith piece. You say that you're a faith and self love advocate. So, can you share with us what that really means to you?
Yeah, so like the backstory is I grew up as a pastor's kid. And so my faith was always a really big part of my life.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that it became my own until I was 16. I was actually grounded half of high school and got in a lot of trouble for partying, and ended up having to prepare for a missions trip. And I was in South Africa for a month at 16. And
Wow.
so for me, that's where like my faith really became alive. And it's developed and progressed over the year. But one of my favorite things to do to connect to God is to journal. I have been
Mm.
journaling for over 10 years, and it's like my prayers to God, and it's also documenting what's going on in life, and it allows me to like flush things out and feel like I'm actually having a conversation with him.
Mhm.
Um, and if it wasn't for my faith, like in all honesty, I don't know if I'd still be here, because of how hard life has been.
Mhm.
Um, but it takes consistency and work to have that relationship. I wouldn't call myself a religious person. I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's where I get my guidance. So I've had to learn how to pause, be still, and know Psalm 46:10 that He is God, and allow Him to fight for me.
Yeah.
um, and I've had to allow Him to like mold and change who I am. I'm a very different person than I was years ago. And I think when I started my business and sharing on social over 10 years ago, it was all about self love because I was afraid to talk about my faith, to be
Mhm.
honest. And it's only been in the last like 2 years, basically since Brooklyn was born, she's 3 now, where I actually started to be open to talk about my faith. I just was afraid of what people were going to say when I called
Yeah.
myself a Christian. And so I just stopped being afraid because it's my DNA. It's who I am. It's how I operate. And I learned to love myself because I learned how much God actually loved me,
Mm.
and started to see myself how He saw me, as opposed to I hate myself, I'm ugly, I'm not worth anything, and all the lies that I was told growing up because I was bullied really heavily. And so I had to re-record the negative tape that played in my head, but a lot of that came from reading my Bible and the scriptures to affirm who I am and who He created to me to be. And it's tied very closely with purpose. Purpose is something that is like, I'm determined to figure out what it is God put me on this earth for. I have
Mhm.
tidbits and little pieces that I've done over the last 10 years, but I know there's something else. And
Mhm.
so I try and stay really close with Him and maintain a really good relationship in my quiet time so that I can be all that He created me to be. Um, that's it in a nutshell.
That's amazing, and it's inspirational. I think that, faith, especially, is something who that I know from having conversations with our community and other people and friends and family, there are so many layers
So
and
many.
feelings and emotions, and I think oftentimes it can be, like, a very touchy subject
Mm,
because sometimes people have a bad experience or, like, even myself, I've had some terrible experiences
same here. Yeah.
in the church,
Hmm.
and I really love what you said about, like, your faith is separate from a title or, like, religion or a church. I think those things go together, yes, but they
Hmm.
also are separate, and I think there is a lot of judgment, like, saying that you're scared to talk about it, like, same. I have people who ask me like, "Oh, can you share more?" you shared that you went to church. Can you tell us more? And I'm like, yeah, but like, how? Because it's
Yeah.
such a touchy subject. But I think for me, if I really go back to the basics, Jesus was rooted in love. And
Mm-hmm.
if we just go back to love, it becomes this simple thing that we as humans have just complicated and made so extreme. And
Yeah.
if we come from a place of love instead of a place of judgment, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is the
Yeah.
problem for a lot of people in a lot of places, we would just combat so many of those issues and negative feelings that come along with religion.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel sad, to be honest, that I didn't talk about my faith. Like, I've been making content for legitimately 10 and a half years. In
Yeah,
July, it'll be 11. Like,
crazy.
so to think like I didn't talk about one of the most important things in my life for so long because I was
Mhm,
ashamed because of what people would think of me.
mhm.
Um, that makes me sad, but it also makes me excited for like what else I can share. And I think also too, people see it as like rituals when they think of
Or
religion
rules.
or rules.
Mhm,
When I would say my approach to Christianity is so relational, and it's like
mhm,
having somebody by me at all times
mhm.
to help guide me, to comfort me, to provide. And I think when you look at the essence of who God is and the different ways he shows up and represents for us, um, you can find great comfort. You can find great
Mhm.
purpose. You don't feel so alone, especially in hard times, but also in the joyful times. Like being single has been hard to navigate. Sorry.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
it's
okay.
not something I expected.
Yeah,
And so having to do everything by myself, wow, did not expect.
it's okay.
It's nice to know that I'm really not alone
Mhm,
in that way. And I think that's also why I'm so passionate about community and connecting with women, because so many women feel alone, even if they're in a relationship. And it's so sad because it doesn't have to be that way.
mhm.
And at the same time, too, like so many of us are stretched so thin
Yeah,
that we don't have capacity to have authentic connections. But imagine we had a place that, like here on your podcast, where we can have these like intimate conversations and feel seen and heard. And that's what I have with my relationship with God. And
amazing.
you know what I mean? Like, so if anything, I have that. And
Yeah,
anything else is bonus and extra, right?
yeah. For
Yeah.
sure. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's so inspirational to see someone speaking openly about that and about not only the good parts but also
Yeah.
like the struggles of it. It is hard to have and maintain a relationship with Jesus if you don't have the supports in the community, which sometimes have been stripped away from people because of
Yeah.
the rules and the regulations of the church.
Yeah.
And so I just think that exactly what you said, if we can just like go back to the basics and just really focus on the fact that we have a relationship with Jesus and that we can go on that journey in whatever time frame works for us in whatever
Hmm.
capacity we feel is right, because Jesus is not judging us.
Yeah.
Other people are.
Facts.
You know? And we
Yeah.
can't associate those things together, and it's hard not to. It's so hard to be part of an organization where people are judging you and saying that they
Hmm.
are in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the problem becomes and the problem lies. And I just think that there's this beautiful feeling of fully knowing that you are not alone
Yeah.
and that there is a plan for you and that you can trust in him.
Yeah. And that you are enough exactly as you are. And from somebody, I was raised where like I had to be producing all the time. I had to
Mm,
produce to feel loved. I had to work to feel loved, which started at home. And then in my relationships with men, I would prove my love, which ended me in like very tumultuous relationships that
mhm.
I wasn't being fulfilled. And I ended up losing a lot of who I was because of it. And so it's hard to disassociate Father God from Father. And so
Yeah.
I think it's really important to um, kind of like throw out what you've heard
Mhm.
and discover for yourself,
Yeah.
without thinking of like, it has to look like, just like we think about going to the gym, I have to go 5 days a week if it's going to be worth it, right? Like
Yeah.
I have to be spending 2 hours reading my Bible and praying. I don't
Mhm.
have 2 hours to do anything. right? So
Literally.
like for me, I mean, I have it on my bed right now. I've recently purchased 2 short devotionals that I'm doing in the morning and the evening
Oh.
because I just don't have the time that I used to. I will soon. But just creating that space, and like for me again, that journaling aspect is my way to like connect with God. That was my way. Nobody said, "Oh, journal your prayers to God." It's just something that
Yeah.
like it was a process to get there, but
Mhm.
it's such an intimate thing for me, and I feel safe and I feel heard, and I've learned how to hear his voice
Mm.
through having that time with him. That's something I used to question a lot, was like, do I actually hear his voice? Like, how do I make decisions out of his will and not my own? And I
Mm.
feel like that's something that I've had to learn a lot of, and it's led to major discoveries,
That's
good
amazing.
and
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's throwing out the rules of like, everybody says it should look like this. Figure out what it looks like for you. Just be
Mhm.
tender with your heart, and remember that God doesn't love us like the earth loves us, the people of the earth. God loves us in a different way, and it's
Mhm.
tender, and he's not sitting up there with a hammer ready to hit you on the head and
Yeah.
punish you, right? Like, so
Yeah.
when you can see it through that lens a little bit more, it can kind of soften your heart and make you open for experiencing that and exploring it.
For sure. I love that. Thank you for sharing your experience with us too, because I think it is really impactful to know that, other people of faith are struggling. Other people who have
Yeah,
questions or maybe don't know anything about faith are struggling too. And you don't have to be educated in it to know it or to think about it or
yeah.
to want to know it. So I love that. Can you share with us a little bit about um your faith too, and like why it's important to you to talk about? Is there a moment that made it be like that for you? Like, I need to, share this with people, because you talk about being
Hmm.
sad that you didn't talk about it for so long. So what kind of made that change for you?
So, okay, we'll try and do this without crying. So life has been tough. 21, my parents split. Again,
Mm.
I was a pastor's kid, so it was a little bit traumatic. And
Yeah.
at 21, I was working full time. Sorry, I was in college full time and
Mhm.
working 2 full time jobs to help pay a mortgage at 21. Then I
Yeah.
met a guy shortly after. Um, and the day I met him, he said that I was the one he was going to marry, and I should have gone running then. That was a big red flag. But I was so desperate to be loved. I did not
Mhm.
feel validated. I absolutely hated myself. And at that point, I had decided I was going to get skinny. And I did 3 hours of cardio 6 days a week, threw up after every
Wow.
workout. And I got to my smallest size ever. And I still absolutely hated myself. And so there was something back then that I was like, oh, okay, that was clearly not it.
Yeah.
Fast forward a couple years, every single person who attended my wedding said, are you sure this is the man you want to marry? This is nothing like you've ever said you wanted, and he does
Oh.
not treat you well. Um, Fast forward less than 2 years, we're married, we get divorced. He was very abusive, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, unfaithful multiple times. Started on this journey to self love and healing afterwards, but the crux of it was my faith. And again, I felt so scared to talk about it.
Mhm.
And so I talked about self love, like I mentioned. And then several years later, I met somebody else after a lot of healing, Brooklyn's father. And again, I've not talked about any of this publicly, so it feels a little foreign. So just bear with
Aw,
me.
yeah, and only share what you
Um,
want.
yeah, of course. And he loves her, and he's very much involved in her life. But I think when I made the decision to pursue peace when Brooklyn was born,
Mm.
that was the game changer. Um, I was now raising a little girl who was going to watch everything mommy did. And I grew up watching my mom be resilient and be a Proverbs 31 woman. And I was able to stand and call her a blessed woman, um, and how wise she was and how much she relied on God. And I had to make the difficult decision just after Brooklyn was 1 to end that relationship and start all over just before I turned 40, moving with my mom 2 hours out of the city, and again on another deep healing journey. And I
Mhm.
was like, here I am, how many years later, and I've repeated the cycle again because I didn't truly fix what was going on in my heart. I can't rightfully show up online and say it was something else other than God that got me through it. So I would say that it's the combination of like becoming a mom, which was my lifelong dream, but also realizing like I would legit not be here if it wasn't for God. And In February of this year, I had to take a massive leap of faith. We found mold in my mom's house. She was in Florida for the winter. And within a week, I had moved back to Toronto. No job, no daycare, and had to put $15,000 on my line of credit to get a place. I had to get something that was fully furnished. It was a unique opportunity in this condo that I'm in, because I couldn't bring any furniture. I literally had to pack up all of my clothes in my car, wash everything with a special formula that was to take care of the mold. And within 6 days of being here, Brooklyn had a daycare spot. I had started interviewing for jobs earlier than expected. I ended up landing a job. That company laid off half the team 3 months into it. I am now working for another company, which we are currently recording on.
Yay.
But none of that would have happened without God and without
Mhm.
trusting him in this process. I literally said, God, you take the wheel. Like, I am done trying to control. I am done trying to do what Sarah did in the Bible. Unfortunately, that's my name as well, where she tried to take her hand and control the situation because God had a promise for her. And
Mhm.
so I have taken my hands off and I'm saying, Lord, your will be done, not mine. And his will has been far exceeded what I ever would have imagined. And here I am less than a year later, working at a job I love, living with my daughter in a beautiful place, with lots of walking access all around, great amenities. And life is starting to turn around and God is rebuilding it. And so
Mhm.
I would be remiss to say that I did this on my own. I said a year and a half ago, whatever is about to happen in my life, people are going to know God did it.
Mhm.
And I want all the glory and all the honor to be brought to him and not to me. It has nothing to do with me. I just decided to be willing and obedient.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. It really is so incredible and I think such a testament to sharing faith and the background behind faith and why that's important to you and like you said, yeah, saying like letting go of control. That is hard.
Hard.
That is so hard no matter what your circumstance. And I just think it's so inspirational. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Um, as someone who has maybe been hurt in the church, which I think is a lot of people's experience
Mm-hmm.
from having conversations with people, I think that can drive so many obviously emotions, but also actions like just saying not for me or
Yep.
no, I don't want to be associated with this anymore. So for people who have been hurt by the church, what advice can you give someone who doesn't want to give up their faith or their relationship with Jesus, but are very like really struggling with all aspects of religion and church?
I would say find community somewhere else. You don't
Mm,
have to go to church. I'm not currently, there's a church that I found where we moved that I really, really like, but I had been sick for 2 months,
mm,
mainly due to stress and having a toddler in daycare.
yeah.
But I like have had a really bad cough set, so I'm like, I want to sit in a church with people. So that's the only reason why I'm currently not going.
Mm,
But doesn't mean that my faith goes away. It's still a
mhm,
very big part of it. And so I think there's a couple elements. There's one, connecting to people who are like minded like you, finding faith based communities or reaching out to somebody who you know might have a faith background, and just connecting with them. I
mm,
think I was recently reading in a devotional this week about the importance of our relationships also being aligned with our values and what we want. It's not just about being aligned with God.
yeah.
Um, Alignment is a very big thing for me right now and probably one of my words for the new year. And so as I was studying that, I was like, oh, right, it really makes a difference who's in your inner circle. And so I
Mhm,
think developing an inner circle that can encourage you in that way and you can have these open conversations, but also like just say to God, God, I feel really hurt by the church. I know you're there, but I don't know what to do. Can you show up for me? And here's
mm,
the thing I know about God. God knows exactly how you need something to be showed up for you. He knows how to bring people into your path. He
mm,
knows how to speak to you a way that you're going to hear him. And I think that that's something I've seen over and over in my life, as well as other people I've interacted with, is just ask. I mean, the word says, like, knock on the door and he'll answer. And so take that risk of, like, if you're not ready to like step foot anywhere or talk to somebody, like
yeah.
just say, hey God, lay it all out on the line. This is how I feel. I need you to show up. I need to know you're real. Show me.
Mhm,
um, Give me a knowing or give me a word or bring somebody into my path, and just trust that he will do that. He is faithful to his word, and that he loves you and wants to show you that he does.
mhm. I love that. That is such a good message and such a good answer to that, because I know it's hard to be struggling in that. And so that gives, I think, a lot of confidence for somebody who maybe is struggling. Your work focused on helping so many women embrace confidence and self-love. What was the defining moment in your life that set you on that path?
I mean, so learning to walk that path myself,
Mm,
I legitimately hated myself. The only thing I liked was my hair. I mean, I still really like my hair,
I love yours.
but thank you. Yours too, and your new color.
Thanks.
Uh, um, but like I grew up really bullied. Like I was beat up in elementary school by the guys because
Oh,
I was the big girl. I was also the Christian. Again, probably why I didn't share my faith a lot because I was
yeah.
bullied in school.
Yeah.
Um, so I think once I finally got to the place
Mm,
after my divorce, so I was like 30 at that point, to keep that in mind. Um, that's kind of when I realized, like, okay, I think there's something to this and being able to share it, because if I found it,
mm,
it's possible for every other woman. And there actually is a specific event when it happened. I was on my way. I was like a couple years into my healing journey at this point, and I was on my way to one of my best friend's houses. She's still one of my best friends. Um, and I was driving. It was a beautiful summer day. She had just moved into a new house. So I was going to help her unpack. And it was in Stouffville. So I was driving in the country. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, wow, I'm beautiful.
oh,
And I love me. And I had been working on affirmations for 6 months at this point, and I had never believed it until that day. And I
wow.
just cried. And then I get to her house. And this is one of the many stories I know how God is real. I get to her house and she's like, "What on earth happened to you?" I was like, so I tell her, and she's like, "You're not going to believe this." She's like, "While I was unpacking, I found a journal from when I was in Bible college, 10 years previously to this, so when she was 20. And in it, I found a prayer that you would learn to love yourself. And the day that I finally could say that I love myself is the day that she found it.
That's wild. That gives me
Right?
goosebumps.
I
Yeah.
know. And so she recently got married last year too. And I was able to share
Oh,
that as a speech at her wedding, and just like
oh.
that impact of like the people in our life that want so much for us.
Mhm.
I want to be that for somebody else. I
Mm.
want to be able to be a catalyst to help you say, I don't have to live my life hating myself. I can learn to love myself, or at least accept myself. And it's not just like, oh, I want to accept my body so that I feel good in it.
Yeah.
Learning to love yourself, being confident, changes every single aspect of your life. It changes how
Mhm.
you show up in your world. It changes how you show up at work, your relationships. It changes everything. As
Mhm.
soon as I started to make those decisions out of love rather than hatred, you open up a world of possibilities. And I think
Agreed.
when we shift that, it's life changing. And I want to be able to share that with as many women as I possibly can in a variety of different formats. And it's going to be changing soon, because I just think it's so powerful. And we don't have to, like, we get one life, we get one shot. Like, let's make the most of it.
Mhm.
Let's pursue the peace and the joy in our life, and stop living in the hatred or the self doubt or the feeling of not enough.
Agreed, totally, and that's so incredible and so beautiful. I just love that, and I think something that's so impactful for me is seeing the ripple effect of these things happen. So like you
Mm,
said, like this happened to you, you wanted to share that with somebody else, and I think when you share that with somebody else, they're inspired to continue that on,
yeah.
and the ripple effect is just so great. So that's incredible. I love it.
Thank you.
Um, I wanna switch gears a little bit and talk about self-care, because
Mm.
your cup of joy, the reason I started this podcast was to explore self-care, selfishly for myself, also to spread the word to others and encourage people to take care of themselves, because it's the best way that we can then show up for others. And I just wanted to debunk that myth that self-care is selfish, which still I'm trying to do for myself, because I find myself really guilty a lot of the time. So huge topic for me, is something I've focused so much on recently. And I do think that self care is part of self love too. So I'm very interested to ask you, is self care something that you practice? Is it something that you prioritize? And if so, what's your favorite way to practice self care?
I think self care is essential. One of the ways I like to look at it is, if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of anybody else?
Hmm.
Especially as moms or just people in general. You have things to take care of. You can't take care of all those things if you are diminishing yourself.
Literally.
Like I think about when I owned the gym. I worked like 18 hours a day. I
Wow.
was sleeping 4 hours a night. Like I
Oh my
was in
gosh.
rough shape. And how was I
Yeah.
going to continue to give and pour out from an empty cup?
Yeah.
Right? And so I think when we realize, like, we stop feeling guilty for like taking care of ourselves, and we start seeing it as, if I take care of myself, I can take care of so many more things. And
Mhm.
I'm going to continue to fill my cup up so that I can keep doing the things that I want and keep giving and pouring out. But in order to keep pouring out, you have to keep topping it up. You have to keep
Yeah.
getting refills.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like having like a self-care bank for yourself is what I think of,
Yeah.
like building that bank up, so that you can cash out when you need to.
Mhm.
But you have to constant. It's an investment. You have to invest in yourself in order to be able to expand, to survive. Um, it's something I actually focus a lot on for myself as well as with clients, that I coach as well. And I would say for me, some of my favorite ways to self care, I truly just love a hot bath, and I don't even need a long time. I don't really like to be in hot for very long. So, like
Yeah.
15 minutes, I have 15 minutes. And I watch a show that I really like, or I
Amazing.
read.
Yeah.
Um, I also, I think this is my best friend's fault. She took me for my 40th birthday to the spa.
Oh.
And I actually booked it again. My birthday's in a couple weeks, and I booked it
Ah.
again for my birthday, and I'm going solo because it just filled my cup up so much to have quiet and peace, because I
Mhm.
don't typically have a lot in a day.
Yeah.
And carving out that time and space just feels so amazing. And
Mhm.
then I would say self-care for me is actually spending time with, my close inner circle. I get, because I'm by myself 95% of the time, it's me and Brooklyn all the time together,
Yeah.
just the two of us. Sometimes I just need to be around people. So even I called my mom today and I was like, hey, can we come for the weekend? And
Aw.
just because it helps me recharge
Yes.
to be around somebody who I can just be myself with and have fun. And Nana and Brooklyn are like two peas in a pod.
Oh,
So
so special. It's very interesting to me because I remember somebody saying to me I was really stressed, and I can't remember, it's someone in my family who said like, "Oh, yeah, like you should just take a day and like go do something by yourself." And to me, that caused me more stress. Like I was like, "I don't want to be alone." Alone in my thoughts, like I'm not in a good place. Being alone will be like the worst thing for me to do at this point in time. And so it was in that moment that I was like, okay, self-care is different for everyone. Like
it
the
is.
person who told me that probably wanted alone time.
Yeah.
They were probably craving that and thinking like it wasn't malicious to say that. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
they thought that that's what I would want. Or, the whole thing of like a momcation. Like no
Yeah.
offense to anybody who wants that or wants to do that. I think that's great if you do. But I remember that happening to me too. Someone saying like, "Oh, you should take some time away from the kids." And I was like, that is the last
I
thing that I
know.
want.
I'm the
Like, I
same way.
want time with them, you
Yeah.
know? And it's different for everybody, but I think that that's why through exploring self-care and asking these questions to many different people, it's so interesting to me to hear all the different ways that you can fill your own cup, and knowing that what fills somebody else's cup is not meant to fill yours. You can do what
Yeah.
makes you feel good. And the other message that I love from this too is it doesn't have to cost money. Like sometimes it can. Sometimes a spa day
Hmm.
is well warranted and a beautiful way to indulge. Other times, like drinking your coffee hot in the car by yourself without hearing a voice for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
that can be great. And it's free.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to cost time. It doesn't have to cost money. It can just be small moments. And I think when we flip the narrative in our minds of like really acknowledging that that 5 extra minutes I took in the car actually is filling my cup,
Hmm.
it's then that we have more energy to do other things. So like acknowledging that we're taking the time, I think
Yeah.
is beneficial too.
I totally agree. And I think the other thing too that I thought as you were speaking was, I think what we need to be in tune with is how things make us feel.
Yes.
Like I'm one, I always say like feelings are fleeting when it
Mhm.
comes to motivation. That's one side. The other side is like, do things make you feel more empowered? Do they make you feel more
Mm.
clear headed? Do they make you feel peaceful? Do they make you feel joyful? Do more of those. Do less of the things that make you feel stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, all those things, right? And so
Mhm.
for everybody, like you said, it's going to be completely different. And it may be like, I work with clients too on like figuring out what
Yes,
is it that works for you. And we might have to have some trial and error, but like
for sure.
it could be bubble baths and face masks for you. It could be I also really like going to the movies by myself. Very weird, I
Oh,
know.
love.
But like that's another thing I love to do when I have the time
Yeah.
for it. I'm like you though, that I'm like the thought of like I'm going to Greece with work in the spring, and I'm like the thought of 5 days on the other side of a country of the world without Brooklyn. I'm like, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
Because I want to create memories and a life with her. I just need a little bit of time for me so
Yeah.
that I can keep giving and giving and giving. And I think that that's like the realization. And again, it's like just being in tune with you and how things make you feel and how it
Mhm.
affects you and your energy. Is it an energy
Yeah.
sucker or an energy giver?
And being honest with those feelings. Like, sometimes we
Yes.
think something's supposed to make us feel a certain way, so we tell ourselves that, and that's where there's not alignment, and I think that's where trouble comes
Yeah.
from. I've definitely had that happen to me before.
Yeah.
For someone who's maybe struggling, what's a piece of advice you could give them in order to prioritize their self-care or even promote self-love?
I think first stop overthinking it.
Mm,
I think we think that it has to be this big, like massive shift.
yeah.
Find one thing and start with one thing. And think of it as an experiment. You might not know the answer right away, but you're going to take one step in a direction. My mom always said growing up, like, God can move a ship that's moving quite easily. It's hard to move a ship that is still. So
Hmm.
just take one little piece of movement and get a little bit of momentum, see how it feels. And if
Yeah.
you like it, keep going in that direction. If you're like, I don't know how I feel about this, let me switch directions. But it's putting enough value and worth in yourself that you're worth it to figure it out. And I think that that's
Mm,
the biggest piece for women is like we still don't see our value and our worth. We still feel like we're not enough. And so at the end of the day, we're not worth it to figure it out for ourselves.
mm,
And you are worth it. You are enough. And the self discovery through that process will also help you in other areas of your life. I think we often think of, okay, if I'm going to start working out, or if I'm going to start doing self care, or if I'm going to start journaling, it's just going to help in that one little task,
yeah.
when really it has a ripple effect in our entire life. And it's a series of small decisions every day that makes a difference. And something else, I teach a lot of like habits and
Mm,
how to create habits and stack habits so that you can live the life that you want. And in the training I took, it was talking about making a 1% change every day. Instead of thinking I have to make 100% change, if you make 1% change every day in 1 month, that's 30% change.
mm.
That's significant,
Yeah. Huge.
right?
Yeah.
And so thinking of it, breaking it down smaller as opposed to like big steps makes it
Mhm.
feel less overwhelming, and then you can get some momentum.
I love that. That's great advice for people to take too. Um, we talked a little bit about Brooklyn, and I do believe that being a mom changes
Everything.
your whole perspective. There are things and situations that have happened to me that I think, why am I feeling this way? And then my husband said it to me. He's like, "You have a daughter." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely insane and so very true." So my question for you is, what values or lessons do you hope to instill in Brooklyn's life as she grows up, watching your journey?
My hope is that I can show her what it's like to trust God,
Hmm.
and um, that she can be strong and she can be soft.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. I think I grew up feeling, I mean, I still do, feel like I just have to be strong all the time.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm ready for soft girl Sarah,
I love it.
my soft era,
Mhm.
because I'm tired of having to just be strong, and I can be strong and be soft, and I want her to see that. And it's interesting because I don't know, she must have seen something in the last week. She keeps talking about jail. I think
Oh.
Elsa being in jail, right?
Okay.
And so
Mhm.
she joked about me being in jail, and I said, if I go to jail, who's going to take care of you? God. I was like, okay,
Aw,
we're on a good trajectory. And I was like, I had to turn around so that I didn't bawl my eyes out.
my heart.
Who's gonna feed you? God. Okay. That's what I want her to know. I want her to know that she can be fully reliant on him. She can be anything she wants to be, and God will help her get there. I also want her to know that she is unconditionally loved,
Mm,
and she doesn't have to work for it. She doesn't have to perform for it. And unfortunately, those are a lot of things I had to work through. but those are some of the biggest things that I've also seen as trends with women working with so many women, is we just feel like we're not enough and we have to do something else to be enough. And I want her to always know that she is enough.
That's amazing. I love that so, so much. And I think it's a good message for me to take too. And lastly, Sarah, what are you most excited for or hopeful about as you look ahead to this next chapter, even amidst lots of uncertainty?
Yeah, I haven't talked about some very big things that are happening. There are some very big transitions and doors being closed.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could just talk about it now, but I just am not quite ready.
Yeah.
But I will be moving beyond some things that I've had. Again, I had to like be at peace with those things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not all easy decisions, and even just now, just talking about it, my stomach is like, whoa.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that these hard decisions that I have to make are going to bring mine and Brooklyn's life to a life full of joy and full of peace. And one day I'll be able to share what's going on. But I think being able to just say that, like, even though the storm is raging, it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not something I could have done 3 years ago. And I'm very hopeful. And a word recently that's like become kind of like a motto internally is I'm a hope blazer, like a trailblazer.
I
And
love
that's
it.
something that I want to like help women foster as well, as like we can have hope even when it seems like it's downpouring.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm turning 41 in a couple weeks. I am excited
Yeah.
to go into that with some things cleared up so that I can move forward into what is next. And I have no idea what is next. I am going to be saying goodbye to a chapter without knowing what the next step is. And I'm not afraid. And so that's something I'm really excited for, because in the past I would have been petrified,
It's
but now I'm
huge.
at peace.
That's huge and so
Yeah.
amazing. I can't wait to see what you do next. To end, Sarah, I usually do some rapid fire questions if that's
Cool.
okay with you.
Yeah.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Me too. Favorite holiday tradition?
Just being together at Christmas.
Love.
Yeah.
Favorite TV show?
Ooh,
It's hard, I
anything,
know.
anything detective, like CSI. I grew up on CSI and Law and Order. Anything like
Amazing.
that. Yeah.
Amazing. And best book that you've ever read?
Ooh,
It's a
the
hard one.
Bible.
Yeah. There you go. That's fitting for this episode. I love it. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for joining me today. Thank you for being so vulnerable, for sharing the things that you're going through, and for sharing so much advice. I think there's so much good information in this episode, and I'm so grateful that you joined us.
Thank you so much for having me and creating a safe space to have these conversations.
Yes. And where can people find you and connect with you?
At the.Sarah Taylor on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the things. Yeah, I give and fitnessbysarahtaylor.com currently, but that will be transitioning.
Amazing. Thank you again. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Your Cup of Joy. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. And if this episode resonated with you, or if you've been loving this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Your support helps the podcast grow, it helps it reach more people, and it means the absolute world to me. So keep filling your cup with joy, and I will see you next week.